So today's special guest is Michael Rothchild. Michael is the president of Landslide Records, which is an independent recording company out of Atlanta. Michael has the distinction of being in business for 25 straight years. Is that correct, I think?
Correct.
So he's here to talk to us today about the what he looks for in an independent artist or young artist who signs. He's signed a few artists that you probably have heard of. I think your first record, one of your first records was Widespread Panic, right?
One of the earlier ones, yeah.
Yep. So we're going to talk about what he looks for in artists and also what it is to run a small company, and we'll ask some questions and go from there. So, Michael, you specialize in a particular genre of music with your company?
Generally, we specialize in Southern music that's somewhat roots-oriented. It's not limited to any particular genre, but it's usually based on blues music, jazz, some forms of country music, rockabilly, Southern rock, stuff like that.
What are you working on right now?
We have 4 projects in the works. One is an Americana country project by a fellow named Gary Bennett, who is a former lead singer with a band that was pretty popular called BR549. We have a hippie grass kind of group that's bluegrass mixed with Southern rock and jazz. The leader of whom is a guy named Jeff Mosier, who used to play a lot with Fish, and their name is Blue Ground Undergrass. We have a young folk singer from Virginia who's quite good named Jan Smith, and one of the artists that we've done a lot of things with over the years, a fellow named Webb Wilder, who is a Nashville roots rocker. We just did a DVD on, and this will be our first DVD, so that's kind of exciting for us.
How do you make a decision to sign an artist? What do you look for?
Well, there are a lot of factors involved. One, can we afford it, for one thing, because there are a lot of people who are looking for big money in the music business, and if they are, they shouldn't come to our label. But what we really look for is an act, a band, a solo artist who is wholly committed to his art and has a passion for what they're doing and will sacrifice to do it. And in the process has created a buzz. It doesn't have to be a national buzz, but it does have to be something that has a regional base to it. It can't be somebody that, say, is sitting in their bedroom producing music and is going to wait to see what happens on the radio or with the press before they get out there. To us, somebody's got to be out there doing it, getting a response from an audience. And of course, it has to fall within the genres that we're familiar with. Obviously, rap and hip-hop are as popular as any forms of music that have ever happened, but we're not that familiar with it. It's a whole different marketing scheme, so that's something that we probably would not get involved with. But if it has a relation to the roots of American music, then we probably would be interested. Again, it has to be something that's distinctive. It's something that's a little different, something that does fill a void somewhere, that tells a story. There's a lot of great music out there that you can say is good, but the bottom line is when you give it to the press or when you give it to radio, are they going to say, wow, this is something different? And that's what we try to look for.
If there was somebody in this audience who wanted to send you a tape, do you receive tapes in the mail, or do they have to get permission first? Or what?
They don't have to get permission, but we do get a lot of tapes in. I tell you that we opened the doors one day in 1981, and the next day there was a slew of tapes in our mailbox. They have never stopped coming, and it's hard to keep up with them. One of the first things you learn in this business is just how many people want to be a part of it, either as artists or just simply working in various areas of the business. It's rare that we will get something that's unsolicited that we'll end up working with. It's more of a case of, gee, somebody we know has heard this band, or we've read something about this group, and we go out and see them, and we realize that there's something happening.
So it still happens within kind of a closed circle. It's either your friends or somebody you know, or you find the talent?
For the most part, yes. There definitely are exceptions. I got a tape in the mail once from somebody you're probably familiar with, a legendary rhythm and blues singer named Nappy Brown, who was still playing, but he was a hit artist in the 50s. He did a lot of great songs, including the original version of Nighttime Is the Right Time. And that came unsolicited, and the demo was just so powerful that I called him up, and we got together and worked out a deal.
So what clubs do you frequent in Atlanta? Maybe we'll send our bands to that club.
I'm particularly partial to Smith's Soul Bar, the Variety Playhouse, the Five Spot, Eddie's Attic. They generally have the type of music that we are looking for.
So if a band were passing through Atlanta and playing a local club and they let you know, you might consider going to
I might, yeah.
Who are maybe the most well-known people that you worked with that the students might recognize?
We've worked, well, Widespread Panic you mentioned, and we did their first album, which was called Space Wrangler. We eventually sold it to a bigger company, but they were an act that a good friend of mine, a blues artist named Tinsley Ellis, touted me to. He wasn't sure about the act, but he was in love with their lead singer, who at the time was a woman. Now that they just have the main lead singer. The woman left the band and married Tinsley Ellis, but they invited me to a show on a Monday night in Atlanta in a club which very few people attended, except maybe on weekends, and the place was packed, and obviously there was something going on there. Another act that we worked with early on was 10,000 Maniacs, and their singer Natalie Merchant, who've gone on to big things, and they were an act that I think the first time I saw them was in front of maybe 15 people in a club called 688 in Atlanta, which has long since closed. But the band was so into what they were doing and so positive, and they were traveling around in this old school bus up and down the East Coast between Jamestown, New York, and Miami, Florida, back and forth. And every time they came to Atlanta, they drew a few more people and a few more people, and they really believed in themselves, and we ultimately distributed their first record, which was called Secrets of the I Ching. And we wanted to sign them to a more extensive contract, but at the same time, Elektra Records got word of them and ended up signing them, and they did very well with Elektra. The act that you produced, John, and how we met, the Derek Trucks band has gone on to do a major label and success, and we're proud of being a part of what Derek has done too. So there's some.
That's a pretty good list. Mm-hmm. So what's your biggest problem to solve as an independent label?
The main problem was always getting your product out into distribution, into the stores, and getting paid. This is no small problem in the music business. And I'm just talking about retail now, and obviously there are forms of music now where they're, through the internet that are certainly going to be fruitful for all record labels. But primarily, when you sell a record to a record store, if it doesn't sell, it's going to come back, and you don't necessarily know that it's going to come back. And you could be sitting there 2 years after the fact, and suddenly a slew of CDs come back to your warehouse, and you think that this is money that's owed to you, when in fact it isn't. And that's always a problem. This is the music business. There are a lot of shady people in the music business. There are a lot of people that have no qualms about just taking your money and walking away from it, or going bankrupt, or closing down. It happens all the time. It's a serious problem now in the business with respect to retail and stores that are closing and so forth, and that's a problem that I think we're always going to have. But fortunately, we've kind of learned how to do it where we don't spend too much in the process, and so if we do run into an obstacle, we can usually overcome it.
What about co-op advertising and dealing with accounts on that level? Is that a problem for you?
It's not a problem, but the deals are probably more weighted towards retail now than they used to be. It usually involves not just paying for an ad or putting up money for an ad, but it also involves buying space in the store, providing the store with free goods. Maybe 1 in 10 CDs that you sell are free to the store, and it wasn't that way when we started. It was more a matter of, okay, we'll take part in this ad, and that was it.
So does your distributor take care of the co-op advertising? Do they come back to
Ultimately,
you?
yeah, the distributor might take care of it, but it falls back on us, and we end up signing off on it.
So they just deduct it from the money they owe you?
Absolutely.
So are you having any problems with the big box stores? I mean, do you sell to these people at all?
We sell to them, but we have, any independent label or any independent distributorship has less power to push your product into the marketplace than the big companies do. We can't wave around the next Shania Twain record or whoever the next big artist might be in order to force our product into the stores. So say with a Walmart chain, they might take a chance on our product for certain stores that sell blues or certain stores that sell bluegrass music, but we have a hard time getting it into, say, every Walmart.
So who are your distributors?
The distribution has changed quite a bit in terms of independent distributors. When we started, we had 12, 13, 14, and they were regional distributors, and they would handle, and they still do, handle literally hundreds of labels. But more, over the past 10, 15 years, these distributors have become nationally oriented instead of regional. So we deal with distributors like Rock Bottom out of Atlanta, Selecto Hits in Memphis, and a lot of the niche distributors, Homegrown, you may have heard of, that sells a lot of jam band music out of the Carolinas, or Miles of Music sells more roots-oriented stuff, and we sell to them as well. And they sometimes will distribute to smaller chains. And there's a whole series of one-stops, a group of one-stops that we also will sell to.
What percentage of your music is sold online or electronically?
Not that much right now. I would say over the last year, it certainly went up, probably about 7 to 8% of what we do.
Do you have any expectations of that growing?
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, yeah, we're hoping that it becomes a lot more viable. And the best thing about online sales is there are no returns. Nobody sends them back. And you really are not sure necessarily where all those sales are going. For all I know, we've had people buy our product in China, but I'm not sure. But
do you fulfill those?
They send the money in.
You fulfill those orders?
For the downloads, you mean?
No, I mean for online sales of CDs, or do you sell through Amazon, or how do you?
Oh yeah, we sell to Amazon and Border, any of the online services, yeah, and they're like a regular retail account. We don't sell direct to them. Some labels do, but our distributors handle that, and it makes the process a little easier.
Well, what advice would you give to a young band that was trying to make it in the music industry?
Well, obviously you have to have a passion and you have to be willing to sacrifice, and it's very hard to do that without concentrating on it almost all the time. Obviously you have to eat and you have to pay the rent. But I think you need to focus on the music that you love the most and what you do best, And if you are a band, everybody's got to be pulling in the same direction. Generally, there's going to be a leader. Bands aren't necessarily democracies, but they really have to get out and work. They can't just be playing for friends and family. You've got to put yourself in front of people who are going to judge you objectively, and there's no real personal connection there. And it's a chicken and egg process, because it's hard to get out there without your own piece of product or calling card to give to people. A lot of bands now are able to do that, to create something. It's a lot easier to do than when I started in the business. And some bands, that's all they do. They have their own unit. One of the bands that we've worked with is a group called Sound Tribe Sector 9. Has anybody heard of Sound Tribe Sector 9? Okay, not bad. They have decided, we had 3 of their records, and we did very well with them, but they decided that they wanted to do everything on their own everything, sell it all themselves, and primarily make their living off live shows, and anything that they sell in terms of merchandising was gravy. And I think they've done a good job of it. So if you can do that when you're starting out, if you can come up with a piece of product that you can put in front of a club owner or a booking agent, you're ahead of the game already. And then it's a matter of word of mouth. We can all talk about the hype in the music business, about the importance of publicity and radio airplay, but unless people are walking out of your gig or listening to you on the radio and following that up by saying, wow, that's really great, and telling their friends about it, chances are, it's not going to happen.
You mentioned in senior seminar that some of your best accounts were your own artists.
Well, that's true, because especially with independent labels, we try very hard to get our acts out on the road. Indie labels, in many ways, act as a management for young groups. A lot of times the acts that we've signed don't even have managers, and they don't necessarily need managers, but so we fill that void. But we encourage our acts to take product out there on the road. They can sound scan them from there. They can add to their power in terms of the whole retail end of the business by selling their own product. And it's great for the label. We usually will discount the price to the artist, and they're selling them at full price. That particular money, the extra money that they make, and a lot of acts go out and play for $100 a night. The extra money is going to pay for gas or hotel rooms or whatever. And so we encourage it. Yes, some of our acts are really excellent at it, and it's just it's great for the label to be able to collect money from the artists in that regard.
How do they go about getting SoundScan credit for the records they sell at the venues and clubs?
There are venue SoundScan sheets that the touring artists send that we provide with them. They are sent to the label on a weekly basis. They have to be they have to be filled out, and they have to be signed by the particular venue, the manager of the venue, all of the details of the particular gig and the number of records sold and how much they collected, all on that sheet. They fax it or email it to us. We sign off on it, and then we report it to SoundScans. And it's a relatively simple process, but it is a big pain for some acts, especially acts that really like to party after their gigs and they forget about the sheets, or the SoundScan sheets come in with the wrong barcode numbers on them, or you can't make out the date or the signature or the zip code or whatever, and an ongoing problem.
These things have to be filed in a timely manner, right?
Absolutely. The way they do it is SoundScans are reported by the label every Thursday morning. So anything from the previous Thursday through Wednesday evening is sent, and then we have to send it on the same day. And if you miss, that's it.
That is it. And the venue has to sign it too, right?
The venue has to sign it. And they will check. They'll call the venue and say, did you sign for these 40 CDs?
Oh.
So, I mean, you can get away with it a little bit. I won't say that some of our acts haven't done that, but it's not a good idea.
Can you send us a copy of one of those forms so we could put it up on the account?
I can email it to you.
That'd be good. Is there some kind of classic, customary mistake that bands make that you could warn them against?
Well, there are any number of them, but I think that the main thing is underestimating the value of playing, and that goes for established artists too. That the more you play, the better the band is going to be. A lot of bands don't even think they have to rehearse. You know, they just go up and they get up and they have a few songs and they play and they kind of jam on them, and usually they don't get anywhere doing that. It takes a lot of work to be a successful band, and you have to be thinking about it constantly, and you have to be thinking about how you can improve your show. I think main thing that I would say with bands starting out is their presentation on the bandstand. Usually young bands could tend to be a bit sloppy. They piddle around in between songs, they play with their equipment, they're obviously not together, and that goes a long way with an audience. So, I guess some bands like the Grateful Dead always got away with it, but most don't.
Can you tell of any particular method that bands use to sell records or merch at the gig that works better than another?
You mean announcing from the...
Well, having somebody go around the tables, or just putting the CDs at the bar is not really enough, is it?
No, you really should have a merch table, and if you're lucky enough to have a roadie with you, that's what they should be doing. But the most successful bands at selling merchandise are the ones that come over to the table after the show, they announce that they're going to be there, they autograph the CDs, they're talking to people, and they're talking it up. And that's another point. I can't tell you how many talented people I have met who don't know how to play the politics of dealing with venues. No matter how big a jerk the sound man is, no matter how big an idiot the manager is, the idea is to be as nice as possible to these people, and to really get out and sell yourself as a person as well as a musician. I'm always amazed at the people who, despite being great at what they do musically, are unable to do that.
Let's talk about contracts for a second. First of all, do you try to take publishing from your artists? Do you help them with that, or?
I have, but I don't do it in a way that I think is unfair. It just depends. In my years in the business, I think the knowledge of publishing and protecting your intellectual property has really grown amongst musicians, and I think that's a good thing. Early on, we probably did more publishing than we do now, but I do have a publishing company and do know the mechanics of dealing with it, and people that I feel need help with it, I'm happy to offer our services. But no, that's not a mandatory thing. It used to be a mandatory thing with a lot of labels. If the band or the act has the ability to handle their own publishing, they should do that. It's a little more complicated now than it used to be. With all the royalties that come through the download business, there's a lot more to deal with, a lot more than just mechanical royalties or just BMI or ASCAP royalties. But our contracts tend to be more favorable with respect to artist royalties and less favorable than bigger companies on advances and production budgets. There's only so much we can afford, so we try to make up by giving the artist a really good break on royalties.
What's an average budget for you? Recording budget.
Recording, usually somewhere between 10 and 50,000.
10 and 50,000?
Yeah, but I'd say it would average out more closer to 15 to 20, somewhere in there.
Do you ask artists to sign multi-term contracts?
We try, yes, and we weren't able to do that with your act, you know.
Hey, it wasn't my fault.
We signed John's act with Derek Truck's band, but it was only a one-off deal. And fortunately, the album is still selling after, almost 10 years.
Yeah.
But it's important to the label to be able to sign a multi-record deal, only because you put a lot of time and effort into establishing an act, especially at our level, you know, where we're dealing with emerging acts. And you want to be able to have something to show for it. Obviously, the more money you put up, the more you should get with respect to rights and number of albums. But we usually shoot try to get at least 3 out of people.
These are option.
Yeah, I mean, yes.
Yeah. And so, you have a controlled composition clause, you try to limit your mechanical royalties.
Yes, we do.
What is it? The 10 times 3/4 minimum stat?
Usually 12 times 3/4.
Well, that's a little bit more generous than most of the companies, huh?
A little more, yeah. But the mechanical royalty rates have gone up so much, they go up every year, that it's one of those things, you know, you have to do to try to stay out of the game.
What percentage of your records recoup, or maybe to put it another way, what percentage make money or are profitable?
Most of them do. Not a lot, because we're not shooting for the moon. If we're spending $500,000 on a record, we have a very tough time recouping, and most records don't recoup. Most records don't sell. I'm not sure of the exact statistics, but at the last industry conference I went to, I heard something to the effect that 71% of all the albums that came out last year sold less than 1,000 copies.
Whoa.
And you're talking about, 50,000 releases. But over the years, we have learned that to get a good idea of what the band's potential is, to gear our production and marketing budgets around that potential, and pretty much we will come out. I'm not sure of the exact percentage, but I would say in the 70% range of ours probably make money.
When you start your year, do you start with a budget and a plan?
We try to do that, but you know, it isn't always rocket science, and things come along, and you have an opportunity to do something, and you try to do it and adjust accordingly. But yeah, we'll usually say we're going to do so many projects this year, they're going to cost us this much, we anticipate taking in this much, and try to stick as close as we can to it.
I see. Where do you see yourself or your own company in 5 years, or do you project that far into the future for yourself?
I would like to, but I can't say honestly that I have necessarily a 5-year plan. But
about 2 weeks.
2 weeks we can do, yeah. Sometimes. Depends on whether the bank account is in shape or not.
Well, maybe we should open up questions. Anybody have any questions of Michael Rothchild? Daniel?
What would you say is the most stressful work you've done?
sorry.
Most stressful part of your job?
It changes. It has changed over the years. Early on, it was just, paying the overhead and keeping everything afloat. But right now, I'd say the most stressful part is remains trying to get as much product into the marketplace as possible, getting into accounts that we've been talking about, like Walmart and Best Buys or Borders or Barnes & Noble, maxing the potential of those particular accounts. And we've also been doing more exporting now than we have in the past. We used to do licensing deals overseas. Now a lot of the type of music that we do are more easily exported. So that can be stressful. You send a whole bunch of albums overseas, and if somebody doesn't pay you, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to spend all that money to go over to Germany and beat the guy up?
Yeah, I had that problem too. Anybody else? Any questions? Did I see any? Oh, Michael?
How do you balance wanting to spend as much time and effort into promoting and developing an artist and wanting to keep your costs down and making a profit?
That's not easy because as acts emerge and start doing things, all of a sudden more promotional areas open up, and sometimes you have to put the brakes on and say, wait a minute, we're just going too fast here. We've already laid all this money for radio, or we've gone in this direction, and now the act wants to go in that direction. And it is a difficult thing to balance, but it is different with every act, and I can't say that we have a particular plan. It's the kind of thing where you sort of improvise along the way and just use your best experience to do it.
Could you explain exactly how you started an independent label, like how you guys started it?
How we sell?
How do you?
Start a label.
Oh, start a label? Now, I can only speak from my personal experience and friends in the business. I started with a passion for music. I started with a very deep appreciation for the history of a lot of the forms of music that I like: blues, jazz, New Orleans music. I went to school at Tulane in the 60s and saw all these wonderful people play, and that certainly fueled the passion. When I started the label, I did have some experience working in distribution and in rack jobbing, so I kind of knew how the business worked. You have to have, there are people who've actually started labels without acts. I don't know how they do that, but I know people who've spent millions of dollars, and then they go out and try to find acts. In the case of an independent label, I think you start with an act and you build from there. Certainly you have to have a certain amount of funding, and not as much maybe as you think you'd have to have, but you have to be organized in such a way to be able to afford the whole ball of wax when you start out. In my case, I was good friends with an Atlanta musician named Bruce Hampton, and he had friends who were looking to record, and he had a band that was looking to record, and we, before we even started the label, we produced a record, and we tried to get some distribution right off, and the record was beyond classification. It fell between the cracks. It didn't have any particular one genre except this particular artist. Mr. Hampton had a cult following of sorts. But we got a little bit lucky in that we sent it to the critic from the New York Times, the late, great Robert Palmer, who happened to be a fan of Bruce Hampton's, and he wrote this glowing review in the Sunday New York Times. And we were able to parlay that into some notices and attract other musicians to the label who were impressed with what we had done. Now, that particular album was a flop. We didn't sell many at all, even with the big write-up in the New York Times. But it sort of established what we were doing, and we were able to, I think one of the most important things we did at that point was to go to at that point, there was an independent label and distribution organization, which no longer exists, but similar to the National Association of Record Merchandisers. And we went to their convention. We met a lot of people who were involved in sales. We schmoozed them, and were able to establish our distribution. That was the hardest part going out. It wasn't particularly hard getting the records played on college radio. It wasn't particularly hard getting reviews, but getting the product out into the country was a hard part. And speaking of that first album, and this is something everybody should realize, and one of the earliest pieces of advice I had about being involved with both music and movies is that when you have an album or a film, it's a piece of property. It's like a piece of real estate, and it endures. So this album that we did with Bruce Hampton, our first album, which sold maybe 2 in every state, was not profitable for us. But about 5 years ago, a fellow in Atlanta started up a label and started doing music that was similar to this, and he licensed these albums from us because they had never come out on compact disc, and he wanted to put them out, and I sure wasn't going to take that chance again. But he ended up licensing us and paying us to do this. And so we made a lot more than we initially laid out on those albums.
How important do you think it is for to understand the history of the music?
Well, to me, it's very important. My first job in the business was working at an independent distributor. And at that point, in the late 60s, early 70s, independent record labels were labels like Atlantic, Motown, Warner Brothers, Elektra. All of these labels are now part of the whole major scheme of things. But to me, it was fascinating, and the people that I met knew a whole lot more than I knew about the history of this music, of all the music that I liked, and that is a lot of music. And I realized that people who do well in this business generally know who Louis Armstrong are, who Sidney Bechet is, who Count Basie is, who Miles Davis is, and these are just talking about jazz acts, but you can translate that to any form of music. And because everything builds from one to another. Stuff that Louis Armstrong did in the 20s is still being done in other forms today by modern groups. And I think it's important, no matter what field you're in. You know, if you're a baseball player, you ought to know all about Babe Ruth's records, and I think the same thing holds true with music. It is, but it's very important in terms of networking with people in this business. That's a lot of what any business is, particularly the music business. One of the great attractions of the music business is the wonderful characters who are in it, the great stories that you hear. And the more you can relate to that, the more you know about it, the better off you are. And I think that there are certainly innumerable books or articles that are easily gone through to find out that information. And there's just so, one of my artists, a guy named Webb Wilder, always says the past is vast. And it really is. If you're in the music business, no matter how old you are, you ought to still be discovering stuff that's been done in the past that's important to our music.
You gave some advice to young musicians. What about to people who want to work in the music industry? What characteristics are going to take them the furthest?
Well, again, knowing the history is important to me and important to a lot of people, but a real true passion for the music, whether you want to be in the publicity end, the promotion end, the booking end, you have to be willing to put in time beyond the 8-hour day. To me, that's almost as good advice as you can get. You get there early and you stay late. And you impress upon people that this is what you want to do for life. And people will take notice, because there are a lot of people out there that are in it just for the job, and they come in at 9 and they leave at 5, and they take an hour lunch, and they aren't necessarily into it. And there are so many people that want to be in this business. It never ceases to amaze me, either as an artist or as somebody who simply works in the business. No matter what you can do, my advice would be to take advantage of what comes your way initially and work at it and continue to build your chops in the business, whatever area it might be. You might want to be a producer, but you might not be able to do that right off the bat. But if you are working in a studio and helping sweep out the studio floor, or being in touch with it, that's you're on your way then. And if you're showing an enthusiasm for that, you'll do fine. I've worked with several really great producers, one of whom is an Atlanta guy named Brendan O'Brien, who's produced Pearl Jam and the Black Crowes and people like that. Well, Brendan did one of the first records for our label. We had to pay him $15 an hour. He wouldn't take any less. And but he was that way. He was so into what he was doing. He was also an excellent musician. As a matter of fact, a lot of the records that he produces, he's the one playing the guitar or bass on there. It's not credited, but that's who it is. He knocked himself out for everybody, and he could do whatever you wanted, and ultimately, he's at the top of the game now. You know, Brendan?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We've got to get him over here.
Well, you should. He's in demand for sure. Just did another Bruce Springsteen record.
He did? He did, really? Wow. He's an amazing kid. Well, any other questions? Yes, sir.
I was just wondering, how much effort, I guess, do you put into the development of new artists?
Well, that's basically what we do as an independent label. So our entire effort is usually, now that's not to say that we don't have acts on the label that aren't established in some way. We recently did an album with Dave Bartholomew. How many people here have heard of Dave Bartholomew? Well, that's not bad. You know, Dave Bartholomew is a New Orleans guy who wrote and produced just about all of Fats Domino's hits.
He's the real Fats Domino, isn't he?
He's the real Fats Domino. If he could sing, he would be Fats Domino. Great musician, great producer, probably had maybe the earliest rock and roll band from the late 40s, early 50s, a band that recorded with Fats Domino, Little Richard, Lloyd Price, and several others. But I mention him because he was an established guy that we did an album with just because I love Dave and I loved his music. For the most part, though, what you're talking about are acts that aren't well known, that have a need for an indie label to give them a push and are willing to work for it. But even at the level we're at, they have to have created some kind of spark. Somebody that walks in off the street that has no track record doing anything, chances are we're not going to be able to do anything. But there are exceptions. Elvis Presley never played a professional gig before he had a record out. So you never know. These guys are the band Gorillaz. Everybody's heard of Gorillaz, right? No?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Well, I don't know that they've played out live yet, but they do some interesting stuff. So there are exceptions.
Anybody else? Yes, sir.
What method do you find most effective when trying to promote a new artist?
I'm sorry, what is it?
Say it again.
What methods do you find most effective when trying to promote a new artist?
What methods?
What methods do you find are most effective?
It's a multifaceted thing. As I say, you have to have the word of mouth before anything, or it's not going to happen. We try to pinpoint the particular radio stations and formats that are most attractive. I think that's probably the primary way that we expose our artists. We don't do a lot of videos, but we do some, and obviously that can be helpful too, but it's more costly for a company like ours. We have a full-time publicist that is constantly pounding the press for our product, but I'd say overall, the most important thing for us is having a band on the road, because that keys everything else. It gives us more to work with. If, for example, a band goes to New York and plays, chances are, playing a gig in New York, you're not going to make a lot of money. If it's a big town, but they know they're big, so they don't have to pay anything. But so we'll try to supplement what the act, what it's going to cost the act to go up to New York and play, because we know that we have a chance. Maybe getting the act on Conan, maybe getting the act in front of the mics at Sirius Satellite Radio, getting some of the key writers out to see the band. But unless the band is out playing, we lose that. And at our level, it's very difficult for us to be successful with a group that's not touring. It just doesn't happen.
Do you market by the seat of your pants, or do you have a marketing plan that you've devised and you implement?
A little of both. We generally do have a marketing plan and it changes from act to act, but with roots-oriented acts, there is not that much of a difference. You approach the same stations or the same press people, and you expend a similar amount of money, but there might be a difference in the number of promos we make or the emphasis that we put on it. There's a big difference between the number of, say, CDs that we would send out to the press than even an independent label like Alligator, which specializes in blues music. I think they send out something like 3,500, 4,000 promos.
It's not cheap to do.
Not cheap at all, and postage is not cheap, and the packages aren't cheap. The printed material is costly. It's a big process.
15 grand or so wrapped up in that.
Oh yeah, easy.
Anybody else have any questions? Well, let's thank Michael Rothchild for coming. Michael, thank you.